When deciding on an aquarium for your home or office, there are a lot of things to consider. I think two of the biggest things to consider is whether to go with glass or acrylic, and then to go with a turnkey system or to piecemeal the whole thing. Buy the filter, buy the light, buy the stand, put it all together yourself. That's what we used to do. Nowadays, things have gotten a lot easier. Things are getting very simplified. You could just buy one setup, comes with the lighting, the filtration, everything involved. That's what I recommend. Glass is easier than acrylic. It doesn't scratch as easy. Acrylic also, after time, sometimes it just has like a slight haze to it. You've got a lot of little fine scratches. It can be buffed out, but I love glass. It just looks classy, elegant, it's thin, it's the way to go. You also want to consider the weight load of the aquarium. You remember, water is about 8.2 to 8.4 pounds per gallon, depending on whether it's fresh or salt water. You add the weight of the aquarium, the tank, the stand, the equipment, everything, you could easily top a couple of thousand pounds, which is a lot for some old floors. So you want to make sure that the weight of the aquarium is within the acceptable limits for the floor. Budget, another big thing you want to consider. You have the initial purchase, maybe you can find an aquarium used on eBay or Craigslist or whatever, but it's the ongoing upkeep, the buying of the salt, the chemicals, replacing fish, unfortunately, when they do expire. And also the electric bill. You know, you could see probably $20 to $100 a month easily for most aquariums. Even a 55-gallon tank would probably put $20 to $40 a month on your bill if it has good filtration. I remember the filters, they run 24/7. It's the life support for your fish. Placement in your home is definitely will play a part in the type of tank that you consider. You don't want to put the tank in an area where it's going to get direct sunlight. You also want to, I believe in putting it in a room that's going to get a lot of love. Don't put it in the front foyer where you just walk in and you never see the tank again. Put it in the room like a den or a living room. So you want a tank that works well to complement the decor in that room. I don't like putting aquariums in children's rooms. It's a little noisy, and there's actually some bad feng shui energy with putting aquariums in bedrooms where people sleep. That's it. Just have fun and pick something that you like, and try to get something that's sealed so it doesn't evaporate as much. A lot of these open, new, modern, like European style rimless tanks, they evaporate water like crazy. The fish can jump out, so they're not as practical as they are pretty. So put all these things into your decision and get some advice from your local aquarium store. To pick an aquarium filter, there are a lot of different types of filters on the market. You want to get one that best suits the type of tank that you have. The good thing for consumers nowadays is the increased options for turnkey aquariums. There are a ton of aquariums out there that the filtration is already built in, so you don't have to consider what type of filter you want to go with. But if you're going with maybe a larger aquarium, something 55 to and up, 55 gallons and up, most of those do not come with filters. So when deciding on what kind of filter you want to look at what type of fish you're keeping, whether it's freshwater or saltwater. A saltwater fish tank filter would typically be a wet-dry filter that will go below the aquarium. If it's a reef aquarium, it would be a reef sump with a strong mechanical filter, a protein skimmer, a secondary mechanical filter right before the return pump, and some good carbon, and a protein skimmer. For freshwater aquariums, there's hang-on filters, canister filters, and again, wet-dry filters. There's also undergravel filters, which are the least expensive and in my opinion work really well and are underrated. Our aquarium industry kind of came to be where it is because of undergravel filters. It's utilizing your entire gravel bed as a biological and mechanical filter. I can't think of a more efficient use of your gravel bed. The downside is you have these big ugly pipes all over the back of the aquarium. You have bubbles going up the lift tubes or big power heads sitting in the aquarium. So there is a slight visual drawback to going with an undergravel filter, but they do work really, really well. Budget is another concern when going with a filter. A typical canister filter will set you back a couple of $100, where a hang-on filter will do almost as good of a job and be a fraction of the cost at maybe $40 to $70. But it's big, it's clunky, it hangs in the back of the tank versus going neatly in the cabinet below the aquarium and only seeing two hoses that run up the back of the tank. So there are a lot of options which are good, but in the end you probably want to go to your fish store, look at the options, touch, feel them, see what works with your price range, and also it's good to see the filter working so you can see the noise level and just kind of get a good feel of if it's something that you'll be able to service. Because if you have to hire somebody to service your aquarium, be prepared to spend $75 to $150 per cleaning every 2 to 4 weeks. So make sure you get a filtration that you're comfortable with if you're not so handy. To pick a heater for your aquarium, It's very simple. Most heaters nowadays are fully submersible. I think it's rare to find a hang on the back heater. Those have been, those were around in the 80s and 90s, but now everyone uses submersible heaters. The only advice I would really give you is that you put the heater low in the aquarium. You don't want to put it in an area where it's going to be exposed to air when you do your water change. You don't want to have to remember to unplug the heater every time you do your water change, because the one time you forget, your heater will crack if it's on while being exposed half to the air and half on the water. That difference in temperature, the glass shell on the heater cannot take, and it'll shatter. It'll result in a big explosion. So always put your heater low in the aquarium. The only other heaters you could really consider are under gravel heaters, and those are used in planted aquariums where you want to stimulate root growth by promoting convection currents by heating the area underneath the gravel. But for most people's aquariums, that's overkill and it's expensive. If you have the money and you don't want to look at a heater in the aquarium, then you could look at these under gravel heaters. But most people are fine just putting one heater in the aquarium. You stick it in the corner. The only other rules that I would follow is to not put your thermometer right next to the heater, because you're going to get a false temperature reading every time that heater is on. So put your thermometer on the opposite side of the aquarium that you put your heater. And with any other piece of equipment, you always want to unplug it before servicing it, especially a heater. If you take a heater out of the aquarium while it's been plugged in, or if you unplug it and pull it right out, it's going to sizzle like crazy as the hot glass is exposed to the air. So always unplug it and leave it unplugged for 15 to 20 minutes before removing it from the aquarium. You do need bottom eating fish for your aquarium. The fish that are associated with eating on the bottom are typically catfish. A lot of the catfish get very large, so keep that in mind when you're buying bottom eating fish. Ask your sales rep at the fish store, how big do these fish get? A lot of the corridors catfish are preferable because they stay small, they're very peaceful, they have very small mouths, so they'll just spend all day long trying to find food in the gravel. Remember, the food is only good for maybe an hour or so after you feed it, otherwise it just turns to mush. But the detritus, the fish feces, all that stuff is going to settle on the bottom. So having these catfish constantly probe the bottom will keep the bottom looking clean and keep a lot of that waste in suspension where the filtration can get to it. And when picking bottom fish, you want to use the same guidelines that you would when picking mid-water fish. Fish that don't get too large, fish with small mouths so they don't eat your fish. And you should mix up the variety too. Maybe some algae-eating fish like plecos or algae eaters. Just remember the plecostomus or plecos get really big. So keep that in mind if you have a very small aquarium. But again, corridors, C-O-R-Y-D-O-R-A-S, corridors catfish is what I would prefer. Just a small school of them, and they look really cute. To pick corals for your aquarium, there's a ton of corals to choose from. If you're a beginner, I would go with soft corals, namely zoanthids and leather corals and mushrooms, things that are soft, that don't have a calcium structure like a hard coral does. So when these corals die, they don't leave behind a skeleton like the hard corals. That's how you can identify the easier to keep corals from the more challenging. If you are an advanced hobbyist and you know what you're doing, you monitor your calcium, your alkalinity, and you have the confidence that it is required in the budget to keep some of these more sensitive corals, then you can go with most of the corals that you'll see at a regular aquarium shop or an online store. That being said, some corals get really large, and a lot of corals, most corals, have a defense mechanism where they'll sting another coral if they come in contact to it. So you want to make sure that the corals you pick are all safe if they do touch each other. A lot of soft corals can grow together and they don't hurt each other, but certain corals will harm each other, so you want to make sure that the corals are compatible that you're going with. But the biggest thing is the needs of the coral. Some corals are not photosynthetic and will rely on heavy feedings of plankton and all kinds of fish eggs and lots of coral foods. So those are going to be a little bit more challenging. And again, you should pick the brains of the people that you're buying the fish from, buying the coral from. But most corals that you'll encounter at a store are photosynthetic, so if you have good lighting on your tank, those corals should do fairly well in your aquarium. And again, just maintain good water chemistry. That's the key to keeping these corals happy. There are a lot of options when picking aquarium fish. I really do recommend you get the advice of a good retail store employee. Find somebody with experience, somebody that knows the specifics about your aquarium, the size, what your budget is, whether or not you want fish that are going to outgrow the tank to eventually get a larger aquarium. Fish are very territorial, and it's been dubbed that next to people, fish are the most territorial animals on the planet. So keep that in mind when buying fish. It's very important to not buy two fish of the same family, because sometimes they're going to fight, especially with saltwater aquariums. With freshwater aquariums, it's a little bit more forgiving. The fish, I feel, aren't as aggressive unless you get into the group of fish called cichlids. Those are very territorial, but they're also very rewarding and very easy to keep. So to pick your fish, one of the main things is size. A lot of fish are not suitable for most aquariums simply because they just get too big. Now there is that old fish tale that a fish will only grow to the size of its environment. Well, that is true to a certain extent, but it's also very cruel to put a fish that typically gets very large in nature to stick it in a very small aquarium. Yes, it won't get as big as it would in the wild, but its growth is going to get stunted. It's going to get very deformed looking. So pick fish that will match the size of your aquarium, and remember that fish are going to grow. The basic rule of thumb is 1 inch of fish for every 5 gallons of fresh water and 1 inch of fish for every 10 gallons of salt water. But factor in the growth rates. You probably will lose a couple of fish here and there. It is normal. So you always have a couple of fish waiting in your, in your head that you want to add in the future, but resist the urge to overcrowd the aquarium. And try to create a nice balanced, we call it like the garden effect. You want a nice balanced garden. You want some reds, some yellows, some greens. You want to balance the colors, or put a lot of thought into making your aquarium have a certain look to it. Maybe just red fish, just green fish. So you can have a lot of fun with the color aspect of the fish that you're going with. But one of the main things is size. The two main things is size and aggression. But there are so many options when it comes to picking fish that for this, I really do recommend you don't buy the fish just on a whim or impulse or online late at night. Get the advice of a retail store owner, or call or email if you're buying them online. A lot of the reputable companies online will be able to answer your emails, or even take a phone call and give you advice as though it's like a normal fish store. To pick aquarium decorations, I recommend you go to a local store, get the advice of somebody that works there. There are a lot of beautiful decorations that you can pick for your tank, and there's also a lot of things that could potentially be dangerous for your tank. What I do recommend, or actually don't recommend, is that you find rocks and stones and pieces of wood outside that look great that you want to put in your tank. Or let's say you go to the beach and you grab some coral or bottles. Some of those things can leach chemicals, stuff that can hurt your tank. It could throw the pH off in your aquarium. So you really want to stick with aquarium decorations that are suitable for your aquarium. And the best place to get that is at your local fish store or online. Once you've got a selection in front of you, you want to choose from plants, rocks, things that are inert that won't react with the water, unless it is your goal to have the decorations help buffer the water chemistry. In certain situations, like for African cichlids, people buy decorations that purposely release carbonates into the water to help buffer the pH of the water. But in general, you want to pick decorations that are neutral. Plastic plants work great. You buy them with the little plastic anchors you could fill with gravel. That'll help to keep them weighted down. Some fish like to kick up the plants and redo the tank decorations on their own, so you'll find that the heavier the decorations, the better. And just build some caves. You want to have a lot of water flow going in and out of the rocks and the decorations, so that a lot of the waste can get carried through the water column and get picked up by the filtration. The fish also need places to hide, and they're very territorial. So the more decorations you have in the tank within reason, the happier the fish will be. A very sparsely decorated tank will result in some fish feeling very territorial and chasing the other tank mates and keeping them up in the corner.